Welcome to Bite-Sized Buyers, the podcast that brings you the latest in technology news from the unique perspective of global technology procurement experts. We're your hosts. I'm Sam Harris.
And I'm Nick Wagstaff.
So join us as we delve into the most pressing topics in the tech world, offering insights and analysis that you won't find anywhere else. On this week's episode, we're covering flexible working in the technology industry, DOGE finally striking gold, the Netherlands' suggestion that it's time to ditch US tech for homegrown options, and finally getting to the bottom of the story of Klarna ditching Salesforce. So without further ado, let's get into it.
So first story, Sam, I just wanted to go through was around a report that's come through from Randstad, I think primarily out of the Netherlands, around flexible working and the impact of flexible working, specifically saying that 2 in 5 tech workers would quit if they didn't have that flexibility in terms of their companies that they work at. So just a sort of view on what this means from a tech perspective, what it means in terms of this drive from companies that are trying to get people back into the workplace and trying to get them back into the office. And what do you think that means from how it will impact on the sort of suppliers that we work with and sort of outsourcing operations as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? It comes at a time where the global tech talent crunch is still in effect. So we're still seeing that impact in some countries more than others. Obviously, we've seen as well a report in the last week from Bain suggesting that 80% of chief operating officers are looking to bring resources back to nearshore and onshore locations. So further adding to that pressure, for companies based particularly in Europe and North America. And we've also seen a lot over the past couple of years of workers voting with their feet. We saw Amazon, Google, Meta and others last year in the tech industry, but in the wider industry, a number of organizations put in place these mandatory return to work, varying from 2 days a week to 5 days a week. And organizations are losing key workers because of it. So it feels like an incredibly risky move if for an organization to take that stance now.
I do. I totally agree. I think for me, tech's always lended itself really well to home working, and it's I remember people 20 years ago sort of being 100% home working, and as the technology's developed over the last sort of 5-7 years, particularly from the pandemic, then it's clearly had that impact, and it creates a flexible environment. What was interesting about the report was that tech employees feel that they have a better sense of community when they're remote working, which is quite interesting. So sort of counter to the theory of, look, we want everybody in the same place so they can interact and they can be more productive. So I think tech always has lended itself well to that flexibility, and I think there is a clear risk there where people they're going to move. They're going to move. They're going to go to different companies if they're forced into that position, and you're going to lose that capability and those good people, the people with the right skills.
What do you actually think is the driver behind this, though? But because the number of studies that came out, and as you mentioned, particularly from the pandemic onwards, the one thing it proved to a number of organizations is whether you're working in agile methodology or not, you don't need somebody sat next to you to do the work.
Yep.
And actually, all the studies that came out of that show that productivity increases with people working from home, especially because we aren't going from meeting room to meeting room. So you got back to back. All our calendars now run back to back.
Yep.
So if anything, we're more productive. So what do you think the drivers are behind this en masse? Everybody saying now, right, that's it, get back. What do you think?
I think there's a couple of things. I think there's clearly something which is being driven by the local economies to sort of go, look, we want to get people back in the office, and it drives the city centre operations and stuff like that. The second part of it, I think, is a little bit more controversial. I think it's a lack of understanding, and I think it's an age thing, right? I think that's where it comes from, where senior managers think, well, it used to be fine in my day. Why isn't everybody in the office? I don't get it. I don't get the sort of generational gap. doesn't always apply to tech because we've always sort of worked in this way. I think we've always sort of had that operation. It's always been part of our ways of working. But I do feel there's a generational gap here where people go, no, I want to see you. I want to see them in the office. I want to see people bums on seats. And we just don't work like that anymore. We don't need to work like that anymore. And I think to your point, we're much more productive when you're working from home because you are available. You do work longer hours, quite frankly.
We do. The one counter I see in this is around innovation, and some of that is let's be honest. Some of that's like eavesdropping. You know, you sat at your desk, you overhear a conversation.
Yep.
It sparks an idea, or it reminds you of a situation where you had something similar and you overcame it, and you can provide that insight as to how. But I think the other interesting side of this as well is around the junior members of staff.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a lot at the moment, and then look, I'll be honest, a lot of it is actually linked to AI and automation tooling, but we're seeing a lot at the moment that, for example, junior testers and junior developers are struggling to learn the trade because of the new tooling that's been brought in.
Yeah.
Is this going to expand that? You know, if you have people working from home, they aren't sat alongside learning from the people, the practitioners who have been there and done it and got the battle scars. Are we actually creating, I hate to say it, but a soft generation of talent coming through where they're not going to have that, and they're not going to be at the same level and standard potentially as the current generation are?
Yeah, it's definitely a risk, and I think it's that thing of is this a case of saying, right, well, actually, you've got to treat this in a way where you've got the more junior members of staff do need that level of sort of grounding, and they need that sort of that interaction, and they need to learn, because it's always better to learn, isn't it, on the job, right? You know, the sort of the sort of learning ratios that you get, you know, in terms of you learn a lot quicker and a lot better when you're on the job.
Okay, so the second story for you today is DOGE finally striking gold. The headline in the Register this week is the HRIT project that's reportedly ran 780% over budget, multiple years of delays. That's 280 million of excess spending. And to be fair to DOGE, they've gone in, found it, and they've agreed to cancel it. And I think it's a really interesting story to bring up because it's an area that we often find with clients across all sectors. This isn't something limited to government. Where transformation programs are put in place and things change. And rather than accept, therefore, that the program should be either drastically altered or potentially stopped, people are blinded by the investment that's already been made and therefore end up throwing good money after bad. We've seen several stories, you know, recently in the UK. You know, when we were talking before, you referenced Birmingham City Council. There are a number of others we could cite where companies or authorities...
It's an age-old problem, isn't it? It's not, I think the thing with this one is it's nothing new, right? We get that. I think it's an age-old problem of not managing those installations, transitions, you know, transformations, whatever you want to call it, you know, integrations of new systems. If they're not managed properly and they don't have the right contractual sort of governance and structures in place, then they can spiral out of control. It's a tried and tested sort of route that companies, particularly big SIs, can generate a lot of funds from it. They can make a lot of money out of them, quite frankly. But equally, it can destroy relationships.
But I think to be fair to the SIs in these situations, they don't want the name attached to a bad implementation, right, or a botched job.
Totally.
So,
well, look at Post Office. Look at that. You know,
it's not just there. It's Northern Ireland as well, where there's a load of money being spent on exiting suppliers from contracts. I think the interesting thing for me here is what this tells us is one of two things, right? Either there was a contract signed up to that shouldn't have been signed up to, that didn't have the required flexibility to allow the breaks to get out at the time at which it became clear that this wasn't going to be a sound investment, or there was some concern around it being appear to have a black hole of taxpayer funds go into a program that was then ultimately cancelled, and that being bad press ultimately, right? And reputational damage. I think the interesting part of this story for me was also some of the smaller numbers. So that's the headline grabber, right? The big number.
Yeah.
The memo that was released announced the cancellation of $30 million of contracts with the likes of Gartner, where for analysis products, where they'd over licensed in effect and they weren't being used. And it's classic, right? It's right sizing.
Yeah, exactly. How often do we see that with customers? They're just not using their licenses. They're not using their products. They're not it all comes down to management and control. So whether it is the big transformation program that doesn't have the right controls in place, as you said, that doesn't have that transparency. There's a mantra that we always use, which is around transparency, granularity, and flexibility. If you've got those things in place, then you've got the ability to change and control and manage. And it could be, to your point earlier, that the program has changed significantly from where it started, and that spend could be justified because, it started here and it got this much bigger, right? So that there is always those things in place. That's, as part of how we sort of build things in an agile methodology. But I think if they've set out with a set of requirements and haven't managed that properly, that's clearly part of the problem. And again, comes back to how you manage that activity from a procurement perspective. Procurement makes a real key part to this. And have they been involved? Have they been sort of used in the right way? Or has it just been left to spin out of control?
But a lot for me, part of this comes down to more of a cultural question and a cultural question within organisations of being comfortable to fail.
Yeah,
and
fail fast. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, fail fast and get it. Make the amendments that are required early and limit these situations. A lot of organisations have this fail and you're out kind of culture that means that people are scared of admitting when mistakes are made.
Yeah.
That ultimately leads to these situations. So these were the old things of you don't get fired for bringing in certain organisations that I won't mention here, but those things are now changing because if you over license yourself by 30 million with any organisation, questions are going to be asked, right? And I think there needs to be far better control. And the point you made earlier around us having a clearer view from a contract management perspective and making sure that actually you're getting the most out of these agreements is completely the right one. A lot of organisations see it as a buy license, buy service, and forget about it for 4 years until you renew it.
I think that's what we're seeing on these things is that they've got themselves into a situation. They don't know how to step back from it. They don't have that flexibility in their contracts. They haven't got that ability to go, right, how do we change this? And it just keeps going down that sort of that hole until somebody else comes in and says, hang on a minute, this needs to stop. Okay, the next topic, sort of this circles back a little bit on something we discussed a couple of weeks ago about how the US were sort of bringing things in more centrally and localizing things. We've got a report from the Dutch government that has said they've passed some motions to bring technology back into Holland and to be less reliant on specifically the big US IT companies, whether that's cloud or whether that's system integrators or software companies. So, is this a reaction? So, I suppose is the question in terms of how the US have positioned things. Is it a trend that we're going to see more of as companies or countries and governments look more centrally, more inward in terms of what they do and how they do it? We saw the reports from the UK government around the investment in AI and how they want to supercharge the UK economy. So really that question of what do we think this means? Is this a trend? Is it a reaction? And I suppose the question as well is why is Holland the first one to sort of make the leap?
Very good question. And I think for a lot of people, a lot of listeners will probably hear it and think it's relatively inconsequential. The Netherlands are, whilst well established, I wouldn't say that they are a household name when it comes to technology.
They're not the first country you think of, are they, when you think about sort of tech businesses? Yep.
No, but to those techies we've got listening, they probably will be one of the first. They've got the likes of ASML, who are the only manufacturer in the world of the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. Without those machines,
I was going to ask you if you can explain what that does. You don't have to
edit this. Without those machines, it's simply not possible to make the most advanced chips.
Yep. So we hear a lot about semiconductors coming out of Taiwan, but really,
they are manufactured there.
Yeah.
But the machines that are used are imported from the Netherlands. Well, or are made by at least ASML in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And without them, there's a massive issue in the tech industry. So I'm not necessarily suggesting this is the Netherlands throwing their weight around, but at the same time, they're standing up for themselves, and they're standing up hopefully for the region as well. Now, the dangerous game here is you get into a tit for tat battle, and no one, that doesn't benefit anybody ultimately, and it ends up being a political game anyway. But it doesn't benefit any organisation. Almost in going tit for tat, are they actually strengthening the US position? So, and the reason I say that is isolationist or protectionist policies on their own, somewhat ironically, are not very good. So if you are an isolationist,
well, they're sort of counterintuitive, aren't they? You end up sort of, it's almost that thing. It's self-perpetuating, isn't it? And it's self-fulfilling prophecy type thing. You're going to end up with a situation where either things are going to reduce down in terms of capabilities, technology, resource, people, whatever it might be.
Well, yes, if you are implementing isolationist policies in isolation and others aren't following suit, then everybody else, in theory, is advancing whilst you are contracting to an extent. Now, if everyone goes isolationist, it then becomes a case of who's got the most people, who's got the most money, who's got the most advanced technology, and then it becomes more of or then it would be more in the US's interest from that perspective. Now, the rest of the world are holding firm against that and sticking with, because we talk about globalization versus localization, but actually, at the moment, the only country we've seen really kick and go for the localization approach is the United States. Yeah. Now, if this is a sign that actually other countries might follow suit, the Netherlands may be first to follow suit.
Yeah, potentially. Is it a trend? We're seeing the start of a trend. Yeah.
Right. And often in the past, it's often been said that we're always one election cycle behind the trends in the US, in Western Europe. So are we starting to see that trickle-down effect that we're going to see roll through? For example, does that mean Germany are next? Does it mean France? Does it mean the UK?
Potentially. Yeah.
And look, at the moment, there's no indication that that's going to happen, but there is a potential. Now, from my perspective, in the industries that we work in, and given the depth of capability and capacity and talent around the world, I think that the world is better together. I think that companies benefit ultimately in terms of cost base, and in terms of quality of output in a globalized market rather than in localized markets.
I don't think the UK is really thinking about sort of being too insular. I think we're very open to sort of global markets and global capabilities. It's a wait and see thing, isn't it? But it's just an interesting trend, I think. It's an interesting news item. Is it a reaction? A little bit? Feels like a little bit?
I think the other thing we want to point out as well, though, is that the US is such a large economy and such a diverse economy that, look, okay, they've lost some of that manufacturing capability over the years and looking to bring that back. That's one of the key goals behind this, right?
Yeah.
If we call out the UK, we are a pure services economy. If you look at our manufacturing industry over the years, it's dropped, significantly to a point now where it's almost not irrelevant on a world stage, but it's not far off. Yeah. So I don't think that the other countries have the same luxury that the US have. The localization simply will not work for certain economies anyway. Yeah. So I can't see it happening wider. But it is interesting to see the Dutch make this move. It'll be interesting to see what the kickback is. Some very influential technology firms in the US are heavily reliant on ASML as an example.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep.
So any war of words or war of tariffs between the US and the Netherlands in particular could cause significant impact. And I suspect, therefore, there'll be quite a lot of lobbying going on in the US at the moment between those tech leaders and the current administration. And last up today, we have the ongoing story of Klarna apparently ditching Salesforce. Did they, didn't they? Have they, haven't they? Yeah. We finally heard from Klarna's CEO, who has explained some of the thinking behind it and what his organization have done. Reported in IT Pro this week in an article from George Fitzmaurice. In a really interesting article. I know it's something that Nick, that me and you have spoken about over the last couple of years since it was first leaked. How are they doing this? What's their plan? Was it a ploy was it a negotiation tactic? Was there something else behind it? Was it linked
to... Is it the beginning of the end for enterprise software?
Yeah.
Which seems to be the reaction that they're getting, doesn't it? It's like...
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. When you dive down into it, ultimately... The Klarna CEOs accepted that they didn't replace Saas with a large language model, and also accepted the story any CRM data in a large language model itself would have limitations. So instead, they built their own internal tech stack. And it wasn't just Salesforce. The claim is that over 1,200 of the SaaS products were also removed from internal use to build these internal AI-based products. That would better harness the data that Klarna had. They felt that the data was siloed off in various areas, and it wasn't the value of the data wasn't being maximized. The really interesting part here, though, is that every quote was laced with almost a backward step in there. It was, oh no, I don't think this is the end of Salesforce. I think it's the opposite. Oh no, do I think other companies are going to do this? Oh no, I doubt it. In fact, the suggestion came that SaaS providers would consolidate themselves and therefore provide the services that Klarna have built for themselves to the market as an off-the-shelf solution. It felt almost like an apology to Salesforce without saying sorry. And obviously
I think you're absolutely right. It felt like a PR exercise, this, which was, oh, hang on a minute, this got out. We haven't done it across everything. It hasn't been across all of Salesforce, so we're still using it. We still like them. So it definitely feels like that. I think the thing I would say is it can't be a massive leap for Klarna to, if they've done this internally, to do this externally, so using AI tools. So is it a case of this is the first step on a journey, and they are going to replace their sort of their external use of enterprise software with AI tooling? Don't know, but it seemed, because it did send a lot of shockwaves through the industry. This, from our perspective, because we're looking at it from a procurement perspective, going, all right, well, what does this mean for enterprise software? What does it mean for SaaS solutions? Is it the beginning of the end, or is it a case of it's just a story that's got out of hand? Interestingly, the Microsoft CEO had announced or put a story out, I think it was in January time, about the end of SaaS, how SaaS will eventually be replaced by AI products, which obviously Microsoft sell a lot of AI tooling and products and such. But it definitely feels like this is a bit of a journey that we're on.
Yeah.
I think it feels to me like these are the first steps on that journey. Whether they're rowing back a little bit, sort of to placate Salesforce, could be, don't know. But it does make you wonder what AI is capable of. And
exactly. But to that point, if you look at, and this is from the article in IT Pro, but if you look at the quotes from Salesforce last year, so just in it was a press briefing ahead of the Dreamforce 2024 event, and the quotes were, how is he in a sense referring to Klarna's CEO, but how is he achieving compliance governance of his company? What is his institutional memory? He also pondered whether Klarna had developed a new way of managing data or new applications that can function in place of a CRM platform. He quoted, "I just know from my own perspective at Salesforce that I need to know who my employees are, who my customers are, their transactions, their history. I think there's a broad misunderstanding of artificial intelligence and how it relates to data management and applications.
Yep. Which now, you would expect them to say that, wouldn't you?
Well, you would, but also they aren't the quotes of somebody who's worried or concerned about their position. They're the quotes of somebody who's, in effect, saying you might want to check your facts before you make this decision. It was a very confident and almost aggressive position, without being overtly aggressive in tone.
Yeah.
It was a very confident, you could argue arrogant, but it was a very confident position taken. And look, all right, it's a few months later, but it appears that Klarna have heard that and gone, yeah, maybe we weren't quite right with everything, and it's not going to change the world.
Yep. I think there's definitely something in that, but I also feel like these are the first steps. And I think that's got a lot of companies worried, and it's quite a big statement come from the Microsoft CEO that says this, SaaS products could be replaced by AI. That's a pretty. He's probably got the biggest voice in enterprise software. Now, what does that AI tooling look like? We don't know, but it is the art of the possible, isn't it?
So that concludes another episode of Bite-Sized Buyers. As always, if you've made it this far, then thank you all very much for listening. We'll be back at the same time next week. If you've got a news story you'd like us to cover, then please do leave a comment down below. And finally, once again, if you've enjoyed the episode, please remember to support us by giving us a thumbs up and subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts. I've been Sam Harris.
And I've been Nick Wagstaff.
Until next time.